Joining us today, along with Myron, is Becky Posey Williams, who comes from us to the General Commission on the Role and Status of Women. And she's the Senior Director for Sexual Ethics and Advocacy. She's got a fantastic presentation for us today, a lot of information. Keep your eyes on the chat window. I'll be putting in a link to a handout there in just a moment. So with that, Becky, I'm going to go ahead and turn control over to you.
Thank you, Jason, and thank you, Myron, for the invitation to get to be a part of this webinar, our most important webinar for the life and ministry in our local churches. And Jason, thank you for all of your assistance today. As we begin, I want you to know that all of your questions are important, and I certainly encourage you to ask them. Jason did a great job of explaining to you how we will handle those. So thank you, and please don't hesitate to submit whatever question you may have as we move forward. The first 4 slides that I will offer to you today will suggest resources and the context for this webinar. The information will be grounded in our beliefs as United Methodist as we reflect on pieces from our books of discipline as well as book of resolution. And I will certainly be sharing with you theological grounding that is found in the Bible around this context. So we'll begin today with our first slide with the definition of sexual misconduct as set forth in the Book of Resolutions. I want to make sure you understand that that sexual misconduct is identified as a chargeable offense in the United Methodist Church. This definition describes a very broad spectrum of behaviors, including harassment and pornography. Currently, 13 states in the United States have a law that criminalizes clergy sexual relations with a congregant. So let me repeat that, please. 13 states currently have a law that criminalizes clergy sexual relations with a congregant. You'll find a resource to an article that outlines those 13 states in the packet of information that Jason will make available to you. This is what I want you to hear today. Sexual misconduct is abuse of power. It's about the misuse and abuse of power. It is a chargeable offense, and it is a chargeable offense that is separate from the offense of an affair or celibacy in singleness. The church recognizes as part of the definition of sexual misconduct the use of pornography. I want to share with you also that in the General Conference 2016, our church did adopt a new social principle on pornography. Most often we see this as a problem with the use of church property such as computers, cell phones, things of that nature. Sexual harassment is also a form of sexual misconduct. It is defined in our social principles in paragraph 161. And again, it very clearly suggests the erroneous notion that one gender is superior to another. It suggests that sexual abuse is about the exploitation of power, and it suggests that sexual harassment must be understood as an exploitation of a power relationship. The Bible offers a great example of how power and the subtle ways it can turn the best of us into people capable of doing unhealthy and harmful behaviors. I want to lift up the story from the Bible of David. Sometimes when we are dealing with sexual misconduct in the church, we find it difficult to believe that the person who's being charged with this offense is capable of actually doing the offense. The story of David in the Bible helps us understand this a little better, I believe. We watch him move from different roles, from confronting Goliath to his role as a young shepherd, to his role as a friend of Jonathan, and ultimately to his role as a victorious leader in the military. We see David living in the palace, and life is going well until his interests turn to Bathsheba. And we see him at that time misuse and abuse the power that he has worked so well to achieve and accomplished a lot of good things in doing that. My question to you today is, do you identify Bathsheba as a victim of a person with power and authority? When you think about that story and you think about what happened in that story, do you immediately recognize that she is a victim and the victim of a person with power and authority? I think this example from the Bible is another great example of helping us understand the challenge to stay humble when people adore and admire the good works that we're doing in ministry. I want to go back, if you will, to this slide on sexual harassment. And I want to make sure that we all understand in this slide that intent is irrelevant when we're talking about sexual harassment. And so often we hear that as a response. We hear someone saying, well, I don't believe the person intended for it to be a harassing statement or behavior. And it's important that we all remember that intent is irrelevant. Just a sidebar from the federal government's Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. In 2015, harassment complaints resulted in $165 million in EEOC recoveries, and almost half of those were sexual harassment. So addressing the issue of sexism and sexual misconduct in our church can be a very daunting one, but I reference again and refer you again to the core beliefs of our denomination's identity as set forth in these pieces taken from our social principles in paragraph 161. These are important foundational pieces for us to remember, for us to believe in as we move forward in this work. Certainly not only in this webinar, but absolutely in the life and role of USDSs in local ministry. So we'll stop here and give the opportunity for any questions that anyone may have.
Okay, and Becky, I'm going to jump in here and remind folks in the audience that the best way to send in your questions is to use the Q&A panel. On the right-hand side of your screen, look for the question mark icon, and when you click on that question mark icon, that opens up the Q&A panel. Back to you, Becky.
Okay. So as we move forward today, I want to offer this statement to you regarding the roots of sexual misconduct. Sexual misconduct is fueled by deeply rooted attitudes about power, about authority, and gender, and will be prevented when these attitudes are challenged and overhauled. I'd like for you to just take a few minutes and think about this statement. I would like to encourage you to think about what this statement means to you. Self-awareness is absolutely critical when we talk about prevention and response to sexual misconduct in the church. So the question I would lift up to you and encourage you to think about in regards to this statement is, where do you draw the line on letting something slide versus acting on it? This is a powerful statement. You have a sacred trust. And as you see that statement on the screen, I again encourage you to think about, what does this statement mean to you? Ministerial leaders hold a sacred trust that is spelled out very clearly in your Book of Discipline in paragraph 363. You have a fiduciary responsibility to always act in the best interest of those whom you serve. And when a clergy colleague violates the sacred trust of ordination, the ministry of every Christian is undermined. In your new role or your continuing role as a DS, you certainly are probably already aware of how the issue of boundaries may have changed or shifted some for you as you become now in a role of supervising your colleagues and serving in that role from a position that is an extension of the bishop's office. So this idea of boundaries and sacred trust is a huge piece in the work of responding to sexual misconduct in the church. I offer to you another story from the Bible. This is one that again, we are all very familiar with, from Luke, the 24th chapter, verses 13 through 35. I encourage you, when you think about this story of Jesus appearing on the road, that you pay attention to Jesus's posture in this story. Listen to what you hear. You hear him asking questions. You see him walking alongside. You see him listening. You see him receiving information. He very calmly allows his companions on this road to share their confusion openly and freely. He encourages them to discover who he is. I believe this is an example of profound leadership. And I offer this to you in your role of leadership, that you might pull from this story, especially in your role as a DS responding to sexual misconduct. When this information is brought to you, paying attention to what your posture is. Is it one that encourages questions? Is it one that encourages openness and freely people sharing their confusion about what they are experiencing? Jason, I'm going to refer to you on this. Are you able to play this piece from this slide?
Yes, Becky, I sure am. Let me just load it up here into the background. Do you want to tell folks what they're getting ready to hear?
Absolutely. What you will hear in this piece are the words of a victim in the United Methodist Church here in the U.S. And these are her words and her comments following a lengthy discernment period of making the decision to file a formal complaint with the bishop in her annual conference.
I decided to file a formal complaint with the United Methodist Church. I knew it would be humiliating, but I couldn't let this happen to anyone else. I will be forever grateful to the district superintendent who heard my complaint. He could see that I was traumatized. He believed me. He prayed with me for my family. He told me what would happen next, and he and the bishop worked very closely with me, explaining processes that I was too upset to fully understand.
Thank you, Jason. The Book of Discipline the Book of Discipline lists 3 roles that are to be held by the bishop and or the DS in response to sexual misconduct complaints. The first is identified as an administrative role. It promotes a fair process for all parties. It follows the procedures that are set forth in the Book of Discipline for the response to a complaint. The second is supervisory. It's a role that upholds the ethical standards for clergy through accountability, through the appointment, and through disciplinary measures and or a behavioral covenant for the clergy. And the third is pastoral. And in this role, you find yourself promoting healing not only for the victim, but for all the parties, including the congregation and the families of the parties involved. You can find this information in the Book of Discipline at paragraphs 363 and paragraph 2701. I'd like to just take a moment and reflect on these 3 roles. When I look at these 3 roles, what I see is your opportunity to set the tone for how this response will be handled. Will the story be heard? Will the story be encouraged to be told? And I'll refer you back to that role of leadership of Jesus in the Bible story from Luke. Are you willing to say to a person who comes to you first with a formal complaint that you are glad this person brought their concerns forward? That's not saying you believe the person or you disbelieve the person. It is saying, though, that you acknowledge that the person did have to find a lot of courage probably to come forward and bring these concerns or complaint to you as a district superintendent. I think it's absolutely vital that we send a message that says we are glad they came forward. After all, our discipline very clearly outlines a process for filing a formal complaint. And in that, we say to our United Methodist Church members and visitors, we want to know when this happens. So let's look at an example of a complaint. A parishioner calls the district superintendent to report her suspicion that Reverend J is using internet pornography on his office computer. Is this a complaint? It is not a complaint because it's not a written and signed statement. Again, our Book of Discipline very clearly spells out that for a complaint to be a formal complaint, it must be written and signed. After speaking with the district superintendent, the parishioner agrees to put her complaint in writing. The DS receives the signed letter later that week. Should this allegation be handled as a complaint now that the DS has received the signed letter? Yes, it is a written and signed statement. It does allege the use of pornography on church-owned equipment, which is a form of sexual misconduct. So absolutely, this would be a formal complaint that should be forwarded on to the bishop's office. I want to pause here and lift up an important piece that I find myself sharing with people regularly who contact our office in their need for consultation regarding the receipt of a complaint or their need for consultation in making a decision whether to file a complaint or not. And what I want to lift up here is the fact that a DS can at times be the person who chooses to submit the formal complaint in writing to the bishop. I have certainly worked in situations where that has been the case, where for whatever reason, the victim was not in a position to submit the formal complaint, and the DS, based upon the information received, made a decision that a formal complaint did need to be submitted to the bishop's office. The bishop, of course, then will notify the Board of Ordained Ministry chair of the receipt of the complaint. The complaint is officially received for the purposes of the process and the discipline when the bishop sees and reads the complaint. So let's look now at an overview of the complaint process. Again, this information is found in your Book of Discipline in paragraph 363. Myron, if you're there, you may want to reference at this time the resource with GCF&A.
Yes, thank you, Becky, and my apologies to all of you for the technical complications I was having earlier. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay. So, yes, when Becky and I were preparing for this webinar and looking at this particular part of it, I was reminded of the document provided by the General Counsel on Finance and Administration that is titled Administrative and Judicial Procedures Handbook or Guidebook. And so Jason has included that in the handout that you'll be provided at the conclusion of this webinar. And I strongly recommend that you familiarize yourself with it. It's voluminous, over 100 pages. And it is also on their website accompanied by another document that includes recent updates and corrections to that document. But I say familiarize yourself because it's unless you dedicate your time to it, it's difficult to remember each step of the procedures. But it will be very helpful for you to have handy from the moment you have to deal with a complaint, because it guides you step by step through the things that you should do as a district superintendent and the things that you shouldn't do. And so just a strong recommendation that you familiarize yourself with that. Unfortunately, I know that many of you have already had to deal with these sorts of complaints. And so you may already be familiar with that, but either way, that's an excellent document.
Okay, thank you so much. It's always interesting and sad to hear in conversations, especially with new DSs, the situations that they find themselves walking into that are continuing to linger from the former district superintendent in the position. Not any fault of anyone's, it's just it has not been resolved at this point, or new complaints that come in very early on in your position as a new district superintendent. Again, that can be a very daunting place to find yourself in. So this slide offers an overview of the complaint process as set forth in paragraph 363. Again, we're talking about ethical violations that are described in the list of chargeable offenses for clergy and professing members, and that list is found in paragraph 2702 in your Book of Discipline. I was recently in a training this week where I will share with you that the ministers, actually 4 of the ministers that were in this training were not aware that the list of chargeable offenses applied to laity as well as to clergy. And so I highlight that to you in that first point on this slide, that the list of chargeable offenses are not only for clergy, but also for professing members. The supervisory response begins with the receipt of a formal complaint. And again, as I said a few moments ago, the actual receipt of a formal complaint is when a bishop has received it. The complaint must be resolved, referred, or dismissed within 90 days. There is the possibility of one 30-day extension to that 90-day period, and that is with the consent of all parties involved. The only exception to that time limit is the exception of abeyance. And abeyances can be used when a complaint is held. A complaint is held in abeyance when it is also involved in a civil suit. So if civil authorities are involved, then the complaint can be held in abeyance, and the complaint must be reviewed every 90 days by the bishop and the Board of Ordained Ministry. However, that complaint can be held in abeyance indefinitely while it is in the process with civil authorities. The supervisory response outcomes, again, you will find in the Book of Discipline in paragraph 363. I hear myself repeating that often, so obviously that's a very important paragraph for you to be familiar with in your role. It can result in three possible outcomes. There can be a just resolution created and signed where all parties are in agreement. Just resolution is designed to give attention and repair to harm that has been committed as a result of the sexual misconduct offense. The bishop can make the decision to dismiss the case. The bishop does that in consultation with the cabinet, and that documentation is filed into the person's personnel record. Or this case, if just resolution cannot be established, can be referred for a church trial. And that is set forth in paragraph 2704. What has changed that I want you to be aware of as a result of General Conference 2016 is that the Committee on Investigation has been brought back into the process of these charges. And so where the bishop has referred these cases to counsel for church, and that continues to be a part of the process. The Committee on Investigation can also be brought into this. So let's take any questions. I know we've covered an enormous amount of information at this point, so let's just take a moment for any questions that anyone may have at this time.
Sure, yes, we have gotten a few questions, and I'll remind folks, continue to send in your questions using the Q&A panel, and we'll do our best to get through as many of these questions as we can. Becky, our first series of questions, we had several people ask, is there an operational definition of pornography, or do we know it when we see it?
That's a great question. Let me see if I can get back to that slide that So let me answer it this way. The reason that there was the introduction of a new social principle outlining the problem with pornography is the fact that pornography is included in the definition of sexual misconduct and is not acknowledged within our Book of Discipline. So effective January 2017, with the release of the new 2016 Book of Discipline, you will find a new social principle that outlines the problems related to the use of pornography. So right now, within the United Methodist Church, the use of pornography, especially in terms of with church property and on church premises, is identified as the behavior that is lifted up in the definition of sexual misconduct. Reality is, it would be quite difficult for someone to know that anyone was using pornography in the privacy of their home or whatever. If it becomes knowledge, though, that pornography has been used in the privacy of clergy home, if that home is owned by the church, then absolutely it is on church premises and would be considered included in the definition of sexual misconduct.
Our next series of questions have asked around the complaint process. And you clearly stated that a complaint begins with a written and signed statement. Is that true?
That's correct.
So what happens if someone approaches DS with a verbal complaint but is not willing to put it in writing? How should we proceed?
Okay. I mentioned earlier that certainly if a person comes forward to a district superintendent with concerns of behaviors that have happened, and for whatever reason is unwilling to put that in writing at this point, one option is that a district superintendent can be the person to file a formal complaint if, upon receiving this information, upon the information that they hear, they believe that this is grounds for submitting a formal complaint. So a district superintendent can be the one to file a formal complaint. And again, I am certainly aware of situations where that has happened. I encourage district superintendents to pay attention to patterns of behavior. If a person comes forward and this is a one-time event that has happened and something has been said to them that has felt like a demeaning, degrading, belittling comment based on their gender, or a comment that has been very much received as a sexualized comment, and they share that this is a one-time event, I would encourage a district superintendent to talk about how this could be responded to. And that might include the district superintendent speaking to the clergy person or the ministerial leader about what has been brought forward, not revealing any confidential information of who has brought this forward, but speaking of it in a general term regarding what is okay to be said and what is not okay to be said. I always encourage district superintendents, anyone in a leadership position, to recognize these opportunities as moments to engage in some teaching and ministry to their clergy who are in their particular districts. If these concerns are being brought forward and not being ready to be placed in the form of a formal complaint, I would say these are reasons for you to be concerned, and certainly opportunities for you to offer some for lack of a better word, continuing education, in-service training with ministerial leadership in your district around your concerns of anything like this happening, these behaviors that are being identified.
And a follow-up question to that, Myron, I'm sorry to jump in there. Follow-up question to that is, if the DS is the one that initiates the paperwork, is there any specific verbiage around there? For example, a parishioner approached me with an alleged charge of blah, blah, blah.
Yes, I think that's exactly what needs to be said. In a formal complaint, what we ask for is that the chargeable offense to be recognized, to name and identify what the chargeable offense is that's being lifted up in the formal complaint, and then offer specific behaviors that support belief that this is the chargeable offense that's being recognized.
And what I was going to add to that is that having dealt with a similar circumstance before, is some of the frustration that district superintendents face sometimes is when you do have only one person who has reported a behavior and who is also unwilling to either sign a formal complaint or be identified as a witness. The frustration about that circumstance is that you have this firsthand report from someone who claims to be a victim, but who's unwilling to move forward. And
right.
Even if you were to write the complaint, unless you have some substantiating evidence of that or someone willing to be a witness to that, then you can't move ahead in the process.
Right. Are there any other questions, Jason?
Not at this point, so let's proceed with the next section.
Okay. The next session that I want to share with you is the information that is also available through your Book of Resolutions regarding the United Methodist Church's position on the use of response teams in cases of sexual misconduct. And you will find that in the Book of Resolutions on page 131 and 134, where the United Methodist Church commends the use of response teams in cases of sexual misconduct. I don't know how many of you had served in churches where sexual misconduct has occurred in previous years, and it was not addressed with the congregation of the church and not handled, if you will, with the congregation of the church, and its negative effects continue to linger within the atmosphere of that church, then you know well what the results of not including the congregation and the staff in healing following sexual misconduct can do to a congregation. This is not work that was ever intended for anyone to do alone, and I simply cannot say that enough and stress that enough. This is extremely difficult work, and none of us wake up in the morning hoping that these are situations that we will get to work in today, and yet the reality is we must do this work. And I simply want to encourage you to not ever feel like you have to do this work alone. The use of a response team can be hugely important in situations where the chargeable offense is against key leadership in that church, especially when it's a senior minister or a lead minister, and that minister is placed on leave and an interim pastor is brought in. So what response teams do is simply they are deployed at the invitation of a bishop, where a bishop says, we have this group of people who have been trained, they are ready and available to come into that congregation, work with the staff and work with the congregation in beginning the healing process that is so crucial for taking place in the life of that church. Oftentimes also within response teams are individuals who are willing to serve as support persons for parties in formal complaints. That can be the victim, that can be members of the family of the accused, it can be the accused, it can be anybody who is a party in a formal complaint. I cannot stress to you the importance that I believe these people can serve in this process. So often, all the people involved in being identified in a formal complaint feel very isolated, feel very alone. We hear people always saying, I don't feel like I have anyone I can turn to. We hear people always saying they are invited to feel guilty for coming forward and submitting a formal complaint, that they feel shunned by the church that has been a part of their life for their entire life, and an invitation for them to go away and not be a part. So the use of response teams and the use of individual support persons is absolutely crucial. The response team comes in with the leadership from the annual conference, which oftentimes involves the district superintendent and very clearly names what has happened. The bishop has received a formal complaint of sexual misconduct against this ministerial leader, and I'm giving this as an example, and the leader is now on leave, and this person will be serving as an interim pastor as this investigation continues. The naming of the offense with the congregation is crucial. You know as well as I know that rumors have begun to circulate in that local ministry. Oftentimes people dream up much worse case scenarios than what the actual formal complaint is. And it is so important that leadership go into the church, to this congregation and to this staff, and simply say, the formal complaint received is of the chargeable offense of sexual misconduct. I always recommend that acknowledgement be given to whether children are involved or not involved. Our office at the General Commission on the Status and Role of Women offers training for response teams. We offer information to district superintendents and church leadership at the annual conference level for how to conduct these initial meetings with congregations and staff. Question to you as district superintendents would be, from me at this point, would be, do you know if your annual conference has a trained response team? And if they do you know how to be in touch with them? Do you know who the coordinator of that team is and how it works in your annual conference? Some annual conference chooses to use response teams for chargeable offenses other than sexual misconduct. So I think it would be good right now to also pause, Jason, and ask if there are any questions regarding this particular piece of response to sexual misconduct and the use of response teams.
Yes, Becky, we have had several questions that have come in along the theme, so let me just touch on a few of them. I'm going to tie a couple together here. Okay. When presented with a verbal complaint, how is the DS to weigh the credibility of the complaint, and potentially if there's a reputation for maybe some of these claims not being accurate or factual? And also along the same lines, at what point does a DS feel like they should file a complaint based off of a verbal conversation with someone of questionable character?
Okay. I'm going to do my best to respond to that.
I know I gave you a real easy one there. That's probably about 7 questions in the queue that are combined into one. Exactly.
I think it is important that we as a United Methodist Church always send a message that we are open to hearing concerns. And so I want to start answering that question from that place, that I want to encourage DSs to be aware, again, of your posture. Are you encouraging people to come forward? I would even go so far as to say, be aware of what the churches in your district are doing to acknowledge policy that around this problem. Do they have information clearly posted in their local churches that say sexual misconduct is not okay in the United Methodist Church, and we have a policy regarding how to report that if you believe you are the victim of that. And so I would throw that into this answer. In a nutshell, I would say that I encourage you to take every complaint very seriously, and I believe you do. The issue of credibility is one that often comes up. My concern about that is how quickly this comes up as a roadblock to responding. And it's not unusual for us to hear someone say, oh, he's that kind of person, or she's that kind of woman, or this isn't the first time she has reported something like that. And I understand that those are credible concerns on behalf of leadership and concerns that need to be very carefully considered. I would encourage DSs to ask very specific questions about, can you give me specific incidences of when this has happened? I would encourage DSs to pay attention to, is this the report of a one-time incident, or is this a pattern of behaviors? I would encourage DSs to pay attention to, are there already letters of concerns that are a part of this minister's personnel file, or again, is this a first-time concern? I would encourage DSs to ask this person coming forward the question, what would you like to see happen now that you have come forward to me with this concern? So I hope that addresses some of those questions. If not, if there are more, I'm certainly willing to take those now at this point.
Well, while we're waiting for that, I would echo what you said, and three things come to mind. I recently heard the documentary producer Ken Burns in a recorded address. Part of his address, he spoke about being the father of three daughters, and he said, as the father of three daughters, if someone comes to you and says that somehow they've been sexually abused or there's been some misconduct that they've been a victim to, he said, just believe them. Start with believe them.
Yeah.
So my experience as a district superintendent was that of all the complaints that someone was willing to put in writing around those issues, every one of them was all of them went forward with some substantiation, with the exception of one. There was only one where a person was falsely accused.
Right.
And the other thing is, I think the real test of that, of credibility, is when somebody says they are absolutely willing to put something in writing and to proceed with the process as it's been outlined for them. That's a commitment that the person who's coming forward is making, and if they're willing to put it in writing, then we have to honor that and let the process follow.
Absolutely. Thank you, Myron. Those are excellent points, and I'm glad to hear Kim Burns has said that. I certainly would ditto that as well.
Becky, what I'm seeing in the Q&A, and folks are really appreciating this dialogue, what I'm picking up in the Q&A is that everyone realizes that these charges, or allegations, technically, that these allegations are very serious. Right. And folks want to know, there's a lot at risk here. If they proceed falsely, obviously careers can be ruined, congregations can be devastated. If they fail to act in a timely manner, then obviously there's a lot of damage there too. what kind of guidance or piece can you give to folks on how to proceed? That this is a serious matter and that it's better to act than not to act.
Yes, I would, excuse me, I would reiterate exactly what Myron just said about finding yourself in a posture of openness to receive, openness to hear, openness to seriously consider the concern or complaint that is being brought forward. And yes, you are exactly right. These allegations are very serious. And yes, you are exactly right. Careers can come to a quick halt as a result of this behavior. And it's interesting true anywhere, but certainly within the church. And now that you are in a district supervisory role, as I said early on in this presentation, you're supervising your colleagues, you're supervising people that you were in seminary with, and it's a very awkward and challenging position to go forward with these concerns when it's someone that you've had the utmost respect for and trust in their position as a ministerial leader. And yet, you must go forward with this. I think it is absolutely important that you have, as district superintendents, that you have support in responding and following through with these allegations. Again, this is not work to be done alone. Perhaps in consultation with the cabinet, in consultation with your bishop, as you move forward with the allegations that are being presented to you, a decision can be made regarding whether a formal complaint would be advisable at this point. Again, our office, more specifically me, is certainly available, and I do this regularly with district superintendents who simply call needing a person to bounce some of what has just happened off of and get some support and some clarity on what my best next steps are. Every one of these allegations are always complex. They are never simple. They are never simple. And I go back to an earlier slide where we talk about a sacred trust. Clergy is the keeper of the trust in this sacred trust relationship. Clergy are the ones with the fiduciary responsibility of always acting in the best interest of those they serve. And I simply encourage you to keep that, as I know you do, in the forefront as you receive these allegations.
I have two responses to that question as well. One is, some of you may be familiar with the work of the Lombard Mennonite Peace Center and Richard Blackburn, who is the director of that. And on one occasion, I heard him speaking about congregational conflict that he was asked to intervene as a mediator for. And cutting to the end of the story, what he discovered was a clergy sexual misconduct event that had happened a few generations back in that congregation that had never been addressed, but had always been known and carried forward in the relational dynamics and the psyche of that congregation. And it was the root of a generations-long conflict within a congregation. And so whatever immediate circumstances we may be facing, we have to also remember that if they do go unaddressed, it can leave scars and unresolved relational dynamics within a congregation that have even broader reaching implications than the circumstances that we have to deal with in the moment of dealing with it as it happens, as it comes to our attention. Another resource that I would encourage folks to look for, I don't know if you would recommend this still, Becky, but one that was helpful to me during my time as a district superintendent was a book called Restoring the Soul of a Congregation. Restoring the Soul of a Church, and it's an edited collection of essays edited by Hopkins and Lasser. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, it's a great resource. At the end of this webinar, you will see the umsexualethics.org website. And on that website, under resources, there's a list of books and different information that can be helpful to you as well. And I just want to lift up one more time in response to what Myron said. You know, it's the way I began my introduction to you on the use of response teams. So often in the past, these problems have not been addressed openly with a congregation. I have certainly walked into churches where there has been 1 or 2 times in the past 15 years where a minister was charged with sexual misconduct and it was never dealt with in the congregation. And now we're coming in as a response team and addressing the current situation that has occurred with the current minister. And to hear those members of that congregation say, if this would have happened 15 years ago, if we would have dealt with this 15 years ago, the health of our church, I believe, would have been significantly better. So, yes, there are a number of resources that can be used for help in healing for everyone involved in the aftermath of this. I heard a
Becky,
victim.
I've got 3 more questions that I want to try to get in here in our remaining time.
Absolutely.
And folks, I encourage you, keep sending in your questions using the Q&A panel. We'll be able to capture those offline, so if we're not able to answer your question during our live webinar today, we'll be able to follow up with you offline, provided you put your question in the Q&A. Some of you are sending them in chats, and it won't work that way, so please put them in the Q&A. So, Becky, I hear you basically saying that the process works. Let's work the process. And one of our questions has asked about the process, saying once a complaint has moved to the level of appointed counsel for the church and for the complainant and sent to the Committee on Investigation, is it out of the authority of the resident bishop, or is the bishop still able to dismiss or resolve the complaint at this point?
It is in the hands of the Committee on Investigation at that time. In the past, and Myron, you feel free to jump in here in your role as well and understanding of this. But so the past 3 years, when the Committee on Investigation was not involved and the complaint was referred to the council for the church, the bishop really is out of the process while the counsel for the church is investigating the complaint.
Yes, I would. That's my understanding too. I have not been, thankfully, I have not personally been involved in a complaint process for over 4 years, and so. My memory of the details of the process are a little rusty, but I think that's accurate. But another reason why I say go to the GCFA Administrative and Judicial Procedures Handbook, and it's all outlined there.
Our next set of questions says, this is the difficult part about the process is if the complaint is not brought by the first person or is verbal to begin with, and so. Is an investigation of any type done by a DS prior to filing a complaint? And after filing, what is the role of the DS as the case proceeds?
Can you repeat that? I was a little unclear on the first part of that question.
Sure. So hypothetically speaking, a verbal accusation has been made, so technically not yet a complaint.
Right.
Is an investigation of any type done by a DS prior to filing the complaint?
Okay. That is not. I would not say that is a formal typical response that a verbal concerns come forward. A person is unwilling to put it in writing and sign it as a formal complaint, and that the DS would automatically respond in a somewhat formal investigative mode. I refer back to what I said earlier in that all of these concerns need to be taken very seriously. And if someone comes forward and offers a verbal complaint, that the DS use this as an opportunity to, maybe the word I would choose to use would be more explore any patterns of behavior that may have been reported on this particular clergy person, or any patterns of behavior that can be recognized in the concerns, the verbal concerns that are going forward. In terms of what the DS's role is after it has become a formal complaint, my experience is that varies annual conference to annual conference. I have been involved in response teams where, and within annual conferences, where the DS was the key person who went into the church on behalf of the bishop and made the announcement to the congregation that this complaint had been received. I've been involved where the DS was the key person who went into the congregation following the formal complaint being received and introduced a response team and played a key leadership role in that ministry being played out when it was a formal complaint.
Okay. Becky, that is all the time that we have for this set of questions. And I know you've got some valuable information here at the end. So I'll turn it back over to you. Folks, keep sending in your questions. We'll be able to follow up with you offline after the webinar. Thank you.
Okay, so I would just looked up these two questions to you. Maybe this is a nice way to summarize some of what Myron and I both have responded to, is ultimately asking yourself, how will my action or my inaction bring healing for the victim and accountability for the offender? How will my action or inaction help make justice and restore integrity to the ministerial relationship? Our office here at the General Commission on the Status and Role of Women offers two primary roles in this work of responding to sexual misconduct. One is judicatory support that is certainly offered and available to you as district superintendents. Anytime there is a situation that has come to your attention that you simply feel like you could benefit from having some dialogue about, know that I am available to be that person to listen to what your concerns are. We also come into annual conferences and offer training around response team ministry and policies. And then we also serve in an advocacy role for victims. Oftentimes when a victim contacts us, it's because they feel like they have literally hit a brick wall, that things are not moving as our process says they will move, or a victim sometimes will call us when they are trying to figure out what it is that they really have just experienced. And so simply to have an outside person to hear their story and help them understand whether this is behavior that would warrant filing a formal complaint, or this is behavior that perhaps there is a lesser response that can be made to it rather than a formal complaint. And then in closing, I offer our two websites, specifically the website of umsexualethics.org. And as you visit that website, if there is any input that you may have and want to share with us, we are certainly open to receiving that.
Well, Becky, thank you very much for this information. And folks, if you take a look in your chat box right now, I'm going to put a link up to the handout. And so that's in your chat box right now, and that's an active link. At the close of this webinar, when you close out the WebEx application, your web browser will be automatically directed to this website here, the sexualethics.org's website, so that you can bookmark that and have that as a resource that's handy to you. Myron, let me turn it over to you for some closing thoughts.
Thank you very much, Jason. Thank you, Becky. This has been a very informative and helpful hour, and especially we thank our participants for their interactive participation, for your questions, and our office here at GBHM is also available to follow up with questions, or as you continue to pursue your work in ministry, if issues related to this topic come up that we can be helpful with, don't hesitate to contact us. We will be scheduling more webinars in the future, and when we do that, we will continue to let you know in advance so that you can plan to participate. And as always, we record them, post them for viewing later, so keep that in mind as well if it is a conflict with your schedule. That's it for today. We wish you well in your ministries, and know that we hold you in our hearts and minds and in our prayers, because this is hard work, but it's worthwhile work, and you are extraordinarily helpful leaders in the particular roles that you play in this connection that we serve together. Thank you, and until we encounter each other again, go in peace, and the peace of Christ be with you. And that's it for now. Jason, I'm going to leave it to you to wrap us up.
All right, thank you, Myron. Thank you all for participating in this webinar. Today, as a reminder, the entire session was recorded. We'll have the playback available for you within 48 hours. Don't forget to grab that handout. You'll find the link in the chat window. And for those of you listening on the recording, that's an active link for you as well. That does it for us today. Thank you all very much. We wish you a great rest of your day. Bye-bye until next time.